how many kids you have in your classroom and where you're coming to us from. That would be super helpful. If you can get around to that at some point. Other than that, we'll kind of jump right into it. Kids in the classroom that I can see, thumbs up if you're ready to go. You ready to do this? Ready to go to the Everglades? Because I'm ready. Let's do this. I say we go. We go now. Okay, very cool. Okay. So like I said, Ranger Nathan, I'm joining you from Everglades National Park. I am not live in the park. As you can see, there's some books behind me. I'm actually stuck in this bunker. I've been in this bunker for who knows how long. I don't know. But we're going to go out live to somebody who's not in a bunker. But before we do, I want to describe to you what we're talking about when we talk about the Everglades and we talk about South Florida. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see this. So I'm going to share my screen, and it will be a map of the greater Everglades ecosystem. Now, you may have heard of something called the River of Grass, the River of Grass. And I want you to notice here water, this blue color here that expands over the whole tip of the southern part of our state. This is what we call a watershed. All it is just basically a big flood zone. And water from this area here where Mickey Mouse lives, Orlando's like right up here. You guys are like way a little bit higher up, a little bit farther north. Will flow down from the Kissimmee River into Lake Okeechobee, and then that would spill out over 100 miles down to Florida Bay in this giant wide river of grass. Huh? There you go. So that's part of the watershed. We are located down on the tip. So just here, this is Everglades National Park. This is a map. You don't have to pay attention to all the words. I will say, though, the colors are important. I want you to notice here some subtleties. There are some colors here. I can't name them all. I'm no interior designer, but there are a lot of colors on this map. And each of the colors that you're seeing actually represents a different, let's see, say habitat or ecosystem. If you've ever heard of those words, habitat or ecosystem. So each of these colors is a different habitat or ecosystem we have in the Everglades. We have about 9 different habitats in the park, and all of them have to do with how high or how low these habitats are in the water. So let me show you here. This is a picture of Everglades elevation. So some of our areas in the park are higher, some are lower, and depending on how much water they get, how long during the year, that defines what kind of plants and animals we're going to see out there. Now we're going to talk now about the plants and animals in this park, but in order to do that, we can't just talk to me. I'm just one human animal, but I want to talk to another one who might be out somewhere where you can see and hear and experience more of them. So I'm going to go right now live to my friend Ranger Kate, who's out in the park. I'm going to spotlight her for everybody. Ranger Kate, hello.
Hello. I am out in the park. I am literally in the park. I'm in it, guys. I am in it because this is one of the most amazing places in the world. This is completely unique. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said there is no other Everglades in the world, and she wasn't exaggerating. This is for real. The Everglades is this crazy place where the water goes up and down with the seasons. So here we have not as much that spring, summer, fall, and winter. You know, we don't need our pumpkin spice lattes, although there's plenty of them. We don't need hot chocolate in the winter. It doesn't really get cold. It gets hot and then it gets hotter and it gets dry and wet. And so during the summertime, you all probably know this if you're up in, anywhere in Florida, really, we get tons of thunderstorms that come through. Well, down here, we can get 6 to 9 feet of rain a year. That's a lot of water to be dumped on this area. Well, obviously, some of that is going to flow off right away and whatever, but a lot of it will sit on this area for some amount of time, and it's slowly flowing down to Florida Bay. It takes several months for it to move all the way from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay. It moves at about a quarter mile a day. Most people can walk a quarter mile in 5 minutes. So this water is moving super slow. It looks like it's not going anywhere. But because it's moving so slowly, it tends to sit on the land for a long amount of time. So we'll have a lot of water in the rainy season. we'll have this wet season where the water's up a foot, maybe even 2 feet, and then it will slowly drop over the dry season. When it stops raining, the sun comes out and dries up all the rain, and the land gets a little bit drier. So where I'm standing right now is pretty mucky, but only because I'm stomping around in it. This area was, even just, what was that, 4 months ago when we started doing programs, I easily would have overtopped my boots here. So I would have been knee deep. So you can imagine that this place going from completely dry to totally flooded, that's a lot to ask of a lot of plants and animals. Most plants and animals can't handle being under a lot of water most of the time and then out of the water sometimes. They like it one way or the other. If you've ever tried to grow plants in your garden or in your house, have a little house plant, if you ever water it too much, that drowns it, basically. It'll kill it, because those plants are usually designed to not be in the water all the time. If you've ever seen an aquarium with fish in it, it'll usually have plants. If you dried those plants out, they'd die. They either need a lot of water or none. They can't handle both. Well, this place has both. So there are certain plants that have adapted themselves to survive here, and they are the only plants that can really survive here, because there are very specific conditions that are really harsh for a lot of other plants. But one of my favorites is the one that takes over the area. This place is called the Saw Grass Prairie because it's covered in saw grass. So let me grab you a piece. This right here is sawgrass. Now, sawgrass is technically not a grass. If you get into botany, technically it's a sedge, but saw sedge sounds stupid, so we call it sawgrass. So sawgrass is called sawgrass because it has these little tiny pointy bits on it. And those little pointy bits, which Nathan has a better picture of, those little points point up on this plant. So I can very slowly move my finger up and I get no big effect. But if I try to move my finger down, I get caught on those points. And if I were to really try to move my finger down hard, I'd probably get a pretty good, basically a paper cut going. So those points could be used for defense, right? They're like, we call them teeth. So you can think of them like the plant's trying to bite you. Well, yes, it's kind of defense-like, except the bottom of this plant, if you go up to the, or go down to the bottom is nice and smooth. And that smooth piece has no defense at all. And we have deer that come around out here and have figured out how to just pull this plant right up and take a nice little taste of the bottom. And that bottom is real bland. Real bland. Tastes a lot like celery. But you know, deer love it. So as long as the deer are happy, I'm happy. But they will eat this like crazy, which means if those teeth are for defense, they're not helping it very much. Well, our teeth are for eating, right? So do you think this plant would need to eat using these teeth? Probably not. Probably not going to be super helpful to have teeth for a plant for eating. It eats sunlight. It eats stuff that it pulls up from its roots. It doesn't need any of that. What it does need is water, because this plant lives in knee-deep water for most of the year. And then for a part of the year during the dry season, right now, that water drops and it's hanging out of the water. So it's doing what it can to find water. Well, this morning when I drove in, it was really very humid and very foggy. And right now, everything is covered in dew. So that little water that you find on your car or on the grass, even though you know it didn't rain last night, which I think you guys are getting storms, so maybe it did. But on a night where it doesn't rain, this plant is trying to catch some of that dew. So all those little points on there grab a drop and then it'll suck it on down. And this plant is really good at getting water any time of year, which is exactly what it needs to do in order to live out here. Because like I said, most plants can't do that. Most plants can't survive wet and dry. They have to have one or the other. This plant can. which is why it can take over this area and other plants cannot. Now, there's one other thing out here, besides the wet and the dry, that makes it so that this plant can do so well. And that is how clean the water is. So I'd like to run an experiment with you. And it's so humid out here, this might be a little tricky. Clean off my jar. My jar is foggy, guys. You're not gonna see anything. So this is our very fancy experimental apparatus of an old yogurt jar, but it is empty. And our experimental question is, how clean is this water? If I were to go get some water for you, not the stuff that I was just stomping around in, that doesn't count, from where I wasn't just stomping around, how clean would this water look? Is it going to be super duper clear, or is it going to be super duper murky, or somewhere in between? What do you think? Give me a thumb show. What do you think? Got some murkies. Oh, got some clears. Okay. All right. So we're kind of all over the board. Well, that's good. That's how experiments should go, is we don't really know the answer until we actually do it. So our experimental question, how clean is the water? Our fancy apparatus, our hypotheses are clear or murky. Let me go get some and let's find out. Y'all ready for this? What do you think? Looks pretty clear to me. That doesn't even have very much junk floating in it. Like there's nothing in there, just water. And yeah, that water is super clear because this place has almost nothing in the water as far as nutrients go. Now, when we talk about nutrients in this kind of system, we're not talking about the nutrients that people need, like protein and vitamin C and stuff like that. What was that?
I think that was a blue heron.
I hope that was a bird. We'll just hope that was a bird. All right, so we aren't talking about nutrients that people need. We're talking about nutrients that plants need. So if you've ever tried to grow a plant, or if you've ever learned a little bit about farming, you know that plants need a little fertilizer. And that fertilizer is plant nutrients. There's not a lot of fertilizer in here. If there was a lot of fertilizer in this water, that would mean that a lot of stuff could grow. So like that green algae that you might have seen around, especially if you leave a dog bowl out too long, or if you just go along I know the canals in Miami have it, any really slow moving water that's got some fertilizer in it will grow that green, stringy, nasty, slimy algae. Well, we don't have that down here because the water is so clean. And it is naturally supposed to stay super, super clean. If it doesn't stay clean, we start getting that stuff. And the sawgrass will be kind of okay with it. The sawgrass will sort of ignore it. This water will pass right by it. The nutrients will go with it. It doesn't really care. But other plants can show up. There are other plants that can handle this wet dry. Not very many, but there are a few. But they can't handle this super clean water. So sawgrass is special in that it can do that. So one of the other plants that can survive that wet dry and can handle a lot of nutrients is cattails. If you've ever seen cattails before, you know they grow a whole lot bigger than sawgrass. They're going to grow well over my head, 7 feet, 8 feet high. And they grow really close together. So actually, if I could get the iPad for a second, Ranger Lil, I'm going to give this back to the Everglades. I want to show you how much space there is between sawgrass clumps. So down there, you can kind of see maybe that there's some dead sawgrass, and then underneath there's water area. If that was all cattail, you wouldn't be able to get in there like that. Cattail grows really, really thick. And because cattail grows really, really thick, that means that lots of little animals can't get through there. So for example, we have these little tiny fish They're my absolute favorite fish in the world. They're called mosquito fish. They're about the size of your thumb, but skinnier. Guess why they're called mosquito fish? They eat mosquitoes. They're the best. So mosquito fish like to get around out here between those sawgrass blades. But if it was cattail, they can't do that. And even alligators, which are kind of like the tanks of the Everglades. If you see a path like what we're making here, it's either made by a person out here or an alligator. This one's made by people. This one's by us. We try not to bug the alligators too much. So alligators kind of are the tanks of the Everglades. They'll just walk through anything. They can't really get through cattails. Cattails are just too thick. So we have to keep that water super, super clean, or we're going to end up with a bunch of cattails instead of sawgrass. And that's going to throw the whole system off. One little tiny change, just a little extra fertilizer out here, will totally throw the system off. So this place being super unique, being the only Everglades in the world, is really because it has these really particular, really small details that have to be paid attention to. So that water has to change the right amount, that the water has to be super clean. And then this place can stay this way. Now, one plant that I want to show you, since I've told you a little bit about those nutrients, I love this plant. Another great one out here. There we go. So this plant actually looks really pretty when it's underwater. It looks like kind of feathers under there. All these leaves look a little feathery, but when you pull it up, it looks a little bit like a wet cat. This, I did not have to rip this out. This just kind of floats along the top of the water. It has no roots. So I want you to think, what are plant roots for? They're for gathering water, right? Well, this floats in water. And in fact, this has to stay where the water is always there. So it can't live in the Saw Grass Prairie because the water goes dry sometimes. It has to be where the water is just a little bit deeper. And that's right over here. So this stuff has to live in deeper water, and it has no roots. So it's not pulling water up through its roots because it's living in it. It is normally through roots, you would pull up water and nutrients, right? Well, there's not a lot of nutrients here to pull up. The dirt doesn't have it either. So this has adapted its leaves to make little tiny itty bitty sacs. And those little itty bitty sacs are little vacuum chambers, basically. And those vacuum chambers, if something small goes along, like a little tiny insect larva or something, say a mosquito larva, those little sacs will go and suck it in and eat it. This is a carnivore. This plant is a carnivore. It's a lot like a Venus flytrap that you've probably heard of before, but this one is our Everglades special. This one is called Bladderwort, which is a horrible name for the poor bugger, but it is bladder because of those little bladders on it, and wort is a very old-timey name for plant. So this is the bladder plant, and bladderwort just floats around out here eating bugs, doing what it can to get nutrients because that water doesn't have it. Now, if you were to add a lot of nutrients into the water, this is going to get covered up by algae, that green filamentous stuff, and it probably won't get enough light, won't get enough bugs anymore, probably die off. So we have to be really, really careful with our water. We also have to be really, really careful with the animals out here. Now, obviously, keeping everything the way it is helps those animals survive. They've all adapted to live here. Alligators have adapted to live out here. Alligators will actually mostly live, they love water, right? Because they're cold-blooded. So the only way they can cool off is to go hang out in the water. They hang out in the sun to warm up. They hang out in the water to cool down. So they will be just chilling near the water, which means normally during the dry season, they'll be hanging out near the deeper spots of water. During the wet season, they'll be wherever they want to be because there's water everywhere. So they're very well adapted to surviving out here. But once we start draining water out here, because we decided this looks like a great place to live. We just need to get rid of the water. So we drained a lot of the water off. The alligators don't have as much room. The plants don't have as much room. Everything sort of starts being heavily affected by people. In addition, we brought in some other animals and plants out here. And you may have heard of these before. They're officially non-native plants and non-native animals. But once some of them start to find this place is great to live in, and they really will take off. And if they really take off, they can crowd out the native animals. So imagine Godzilla came in here. And if Godzilla decided that this was a great place to live, the alligators might not have their place, that Godzilla might eat all of their animals. Well, that's kind of happened. There's one really famous animal called the Burmese Python. You've probably heard of that. The Burmese Python is a snake that people brought in as a pet because when it's born, it's about 2 feet long. It's kind of cute. It's very pretty. They're actually really pretty snakes. And when they were brought in, they discovered that this place was a great place where they could survive really, really well. They can handle these water changes. They find plenty of food. Well, the problem with that is they do well at the expense of other things. So they are eating just an enormous amount of food, just a huge amount of our small mammals, of our lizards, of all that stuff that's alligator food, that's panther food. So the alligators and panthers are now having trouble. But they're not the only species we've brought in. We have a native snail species called the apple snail. This one is the Florida apple snail. It's little, you know, it easily fits in the palm of my hand. Whereas we have a new one that was brought in by the aquarium trade. So in aquariums, people will have these snails in order to clean the aquarium. It eats a lot of the algae and stuff in there. But look at the size of that one. This is called the giant apple snail. And the giant apple snail versus the Florida apple snail, there's a pretty big difference there. So you can imagine that giant apple snail eats a whole lot more than that Florida apple snail does. Well, there's a specific animal here called a snail kite. It's a type of bird, and its name is snail kite because it eats one thing. Well, 90%, 95% of the food that it eats are snails, just apple snails. That's all it eats. So the way that it is adapted to do that is it has a beak that perfectly fits into that apple snail shell. That is exactly the shape of the beak of that snail kite. Along comes a snail that has a very differently shaped self because it's so big, and that snail kite has to adapt or die. It is managing to adapt. Crazy thing, these have only been here for a few decades, not for very long. The big apple snails haven't been here very long. The snail kite is already adapting. So it's actually, we're seeing generation after generation of snail kites, their beaks are getting bigger in order to fit this apple snail. So sometimes some species can survive these changes. The Florida apple snail might not do as well. It might get outcompeted, but at least the animal that is adapted to eat it might survive it. But some of those species, like the Burmese python, like some plants that we have out here, check out Brazilian pepper sometime. That's a really interesting story. We have a lot of different plants and animals out here that are not as easily fixed when they arrive. So, all right, we have just a couple minutes left. I want to make sure to get to a couple questions. So teachers, if you would kind of gather questions from the classes and put them in the chat, that would help us. And students at home, if you want to put a few in the chat too. We're only going to be able to answer one or two, but we'll give it a shot.
Thank you, Ranger Kate. Very fascinating stuff. Learned a little bit about invasive species. We learned a lot about the Everglades and how clean the water is and why that's so important to the kinds of plants and animals we find. And if anybody has any questions about some of the animals we have down in the park, maybe some of the invasive species we talked about, like the Burmese python, just let us know. What do we think? Oh, we got a question, Ranger Kate.
All right.
Can you drink that water? You-
Ooh, excellent question. If you were dying of thirst, yes. But fortunately, I have brought my own water here, so I don't have to. I don't recommend it because there's a lot of animals that live out here. I mean, I just heard some birds and frogs and things. Birds and frogs don't have another bathroom, so they will go right here. So who knows, maybe some animal came by and used the area where I picked up that water as a bathroom just a few minutes before. Therefore, that could make my stomach kind of unhappy. So I'm not going to drink that water unless I'm really, really desperate. And by really, really desperate, I mean 2 days later, after not having had any water, I might start drinking it.
Okay.
But you could boil it.
True
Boiling
enough.
works.
Good answer. Yes. We have so many questions. Like
I figured with
it
100
erupted, it
how many
volcanoed, and now we have like, oh
Yep.
man, a lot of time. So we'll lightning round these.
We'll try.
How many alligators do you think live around the park there?
It is in the millions. So alligators used to be endangered in the 70s, and they have definitely rebounded. They are probably in the millions down here now. Lots of alligators.
What do apple snails eat?
Oh, apple snails eat a form of algae down here called periphyton. And that is an incredibly important part of the Everglades, and I wish I could have gotten to it for you, but it takes a good 10 minutes to explain it. Basically algae, though.
How many species of animals do we have here in the park, Ranger Kate?
I don't even know. I mean, part of the problem, we have like 350 some birds, we have 200 and some fish, we have, I mean, just thousands and thousands of regular animals. Then once you start thinking about insects, I mean, tens, hundreds of thousands, lots of species.
Man, okay, so we're looking around in here. Let's see. How
trying.
many invasive species do we have in the Everglades?
Ooh, I want to say it's around, oh, I knew that number at one time. I want to say it's around 1,000 or so, but that includes a lot of plants and bugs and everything else, fire ants, all that stuff. Lots.
Definitely species from all around the world, that's for sure.
Yes.
Oh, why are there no trees behind you, Ranger Kate?
Ooh, because most trees do not like standing in water. And the ones that do want to always be in water. So we have cypress trees here. Cypress trees grow in water, but they're going to grow in deeper water that's always, always wet there. If cypress trees dry out, they don't do well. So this spot, because of that change of water level, it can't handle trees. Excellent question.
Is the python poisonous?
No, the python is not poisonous. It's just really big. They grow to about 20 feet long. Biggest one we pulled out of the park was 19. So
that's huge. That's huge.
That's huge. Yeah, and it will catch you and it will strangle you, and that's not good. No people have ever been hurt by a python in the park, but it does catch deer. We found one python with 3 deer in its stomach.
Yeah, and I know that there are occasions where pythons do eat alligators, so it affects the whole system for sure. Let's see, how does the sawgrass reproduce?
It produces seeds. So let's see. Oh, none of these are the seed heads. The seed heads come out. This is all from something related to it, but they kind of look like this. It'll produce these big seed heads more in the fall. So, you know, when it's switching from wet season to dry season, you'll see a lot of seed heads out here.
All right. And then let's see. How about any, let's see. Why do trees live in the water? What happened? What would happen if native plants from the Everglades were moved somewhere else?
Ooh, that is an excellent question. We do have some animals and plants from here that have become invasive elsewhere. We seem to trade stuff. The one that I can think of is actually not a plant. It's an animal. It's a snail called the Ramshorn Snail. It's very small. Another one that was used in the aquariums for cleaning aquariums, and they imported it into Australia, and now it's an invasive species in Australia. which is somewhat ironic because a large number of our invasive species here are from Australia. So we just flip-flopped in a bad way.
It's all about the context, Ranger Kate. It's all about the
It is.
context.
It is.
That's right. I love that question. It's such a good question. I mean, we have so many more. We could keep going.
But it looks like we're out of time.
I think we're out of time already, which is just like, oh gosh.
But Ranger Nathan, how could they possibly get here? These are what grade?
Well, we got mostly fifth graders this time. There's some third and fourth.
How could they possibly get down here?
How could they possibly get down here? Well, I have something to tell you, fourth and fifth graders in particular, but third graders soon.
For next year.
For next year. If you are a fourth or a fifth grader, and for fifth graders, it's like this year and this year only, because this is a crazy year. If you'd like to come to Everglades National Park, Big Cypress National Preserve, Chattahoochee National Park, Biscayne National Park, if you want to come to any of the national parks in South Florida, or any of the national parks in the country, we have over 400 national parks, national sites. You could do that right now for free. All you have to do is to go onto a website called everykidoutdoors.gov, and I'll type that in the chat. Kidoutdoors.gov. And on there, you can find a way to print off free passes to the park. I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can just see what that's going to look like. Super, super cool. So right here, this is where you're going to get to that little window, and you can open the window for fourth graders, and then there's also a thing for fifth graders. You'll see it up here on the top. And when you do that, you just got to print out this form. You got to fill it out with your folks, whoever takes care of you, and then they can take you, your family, whoever you want, in a car into these national parks. It's typically like $30 or more. So we're basically, this year, because you're just like so awesome, we're giving you money. It's money for you. So you can come and you can see these places for yourself. I mean, we just explored a tiny little sliver of one habitat in the Everglades, but the Everglades is full of like 8 or 9 different habitats, including like ocean habitats with crocodiles and manatees and cypress domes with all kinds of birds and plants that grow right in the air. I mean, we got jungly habitats. Oh my, panther, I don't know, lots of stuff to come down and see in this park. So I recommend you come down for free right now. You're in fourth, you're in fifth grade. You can do it. You can do it with you and your family. Come to the park. So wrapping up real quick, do we have anything else to say? Aaron,
I don't think so. Just thank you all very much for coming. I hope
I
you
know,
can come live someday.
It's been lovely. Good morning to all of you. And wow, way to spend a cool morning out in the park.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you guys very, very much. Bye.
See you back in a bit. Bye.